A car on fire from the inside out. A champion who nearly couldn't stop. A team left stunned by what they found. And a discovery that changes Ferrari's season forever. Because when Fred Vasseur inspected Hamilton's SF-25 after Singapore, what he uncovered shocked everyone. Ferrari's night in Singapore should have ended in victory photographs and champagne. Instead, it ended in silence. The mechanics stood around Hamilton's SF-25, staring at the front left corner as if trying to understand how something so sophisticated could destroy itself. The car that had promised redemption had just delivered embarrassment. Fred Vasseur's face said it all: confusion, frustration, disbelief. He had built a team on discipline and precision, and now the machine that represented both had failed in the most basic way possible. It had overheated its own heart. For months, Ferrari's engineers had believed the SF-25's design philosophy was sound. Every curve, every duct, every surface had been optimized through simulation. The car was meant to be an evolution, not a gamble. But that stability was an illusion. The same aerodynamic refinements that gave it such high efficiency had created a hidden vulnerability. The brake cooling channels were too tight, too integrated into the floor design. They worked beautifully in theory, in a controlled environment, in clean air, at predictable speeds. But Formula One doesn't live in theory. It lives in turbulence, traffic, and chaos. In Singapore's heat, the SF-25 was exposed for what it truly was, a masterpiece that couldn't survive imperfection. Hamilton had felt it long before the engineers did. During Friday's long runs, he noticed the telltale signs, the faint change in pedal travel, the soft bite of fading brakes, the growing heat radiating from beneath the cockpit. He mentioned it repeatedly. The team replied with reassurance. Temperatures are fine, all within tolerance. But Hamilton wasn't talking about numbers. He was talking about feel, the physical language of the car that no computer could read. By Saturday, his frustration had turned to quiet concern. He told his race engineer that the car was breathing wrong. It was a poetic phrase, but it was also precise. The SF-25 wasn't inhaling enough air to cool itself. Inside the Ferrari garage, data ruled everything. The simulations said the car was stable. The models said the brake system could handle the load. Every variable looked perfect, and that was the problem. The numbers were lying. The SF-25 had been designed around ideal conditions that didn't exist in the real world. Its performance envelope was too narrow, its tolerance for heat too low. When Fred Vasseur reviewed the telemetry after the race, he saw it clearly. Hamilton's left rear brake temperature had risen 80 degrees higher than predicted, the airflow imbalance so severe that the right side remained 20 degrees cooler. It wasn't a driver error. It was a structural miscalculation. For Vasseur, this was the hardest truth to face. He had promised Hamilton a car capable of fighting at the front, a machine built with the precision of Maranello's legendary past. Instead, his driver had been forced to manage a car that couldn't even complete a race at full speed. The post-race debrief felt like an autopsy. Engineers read out graphs in measured tones, trying to rationalize the failure. Hamilton sat quietly, listening, occasionally nodding. When one engineer insisted the data still supported the original cooling model, Hamilton finally spoke. Then your model's wrong. The room fell silent. It wasn't arrogance. It was experience speaking to theory and winning. What Ferrari built in the SF-25 was, on paper, a triumph of efficiency, the kind of machine that should have redefined balance and control. Its aerodynamic surfaces were sculpted to perfection, its floor design a masterpiece of pressure management. Every curve, every inlet, every contour served a purpose. But beneath that elegance lay a fatal compromise. In chasing aerodynamic purity, Ferrari had created a car that could no longer tolerate the realities of Formula One's most demanding circuits. The SF-25 was too refined for its own survival. The brake system, the source of Hamilton's nightmare in Singapore, was an engineering paradox. Ferrari's aerodynamic department had reduced the size of the cooling inlets to maximize downforce, believing their computational models could compensate for the loss of airflow. They were wrong. What those models failed to simulate was turbulence, the unpredictable, chaotic air created by running in traffic. Singapore's tight layout and relentless braking zones made that weakness visible. Every time Hamilton closed in on a rival, the car starved itself of cooling air. It wasn't a gradual process. It was exponential. Lap by lap, the system heated, the fluid expanded, the pedal softened, until it failed completely. The irony was almost cruel. Ferrari's engineers had done everything right by modern standards: simulations, wind tunnel analysis, correlation checks. But they had designed for ideal conditions, not for reality. In Formula One, perfection on paper often means fragility on track. Hamilton had sensed that from the beginning. His feedback wasn't about numbers. It was about feel, the millisecond delay between braking pressure and response, the way the pedal pulsed under stress. He described it as breathing wrong, and though poetic, it was accurate. The SF-25 wasn't circulating air as it should. The system wasn't alive, it was suffocating. Inside Ferrari's technical office, the post-race inspection turned into revelation. When the brake assembly was dismantled, the evidence was undeniable. The left-hand caliper showed severe heat damage, the composite layers blistered and separating. The right-hand caliper, meanwhile, looked almost untouched. That asymmetry was the smoking gun. The car wasn't cooling evenly. Its aerodynamic architecture, designed for balance and downforce, had created a vortex of unequal pressure. The front left brake duct, compressed by floor geometry, received 30% less airflow than intended. It was a design flaw buried so deep in structure that no amount of surface tweaking could fix it. Fred Vasseur, standing beside the engineers as they examined the parts, understood the scale of the mistake. This wasn't a faulty sensor or a bad batch of materials. It was systemic, a reflection of how far Ferrari's engineering philosophy had drifted from practicality. "We designed a car for speed," one mechanic reportedly said, "not for life." That line summed up the entire problem. Ferrari had been so consumed by performance metrics that they'd forgotten endurance. The SF-25 could fly in qualifying laps, but it couldn't survive its own intensity over a full race distance. And yet, within that failure lay something extraordinary. Hamilton's ability to diagnose the issue in real time had given Ferrari a blueprint for correction. His feel for the car was more precise than the sensors, his instincts sharper than the data. When the telemetry was cross-referenced with his feedback, every phrase he'd used matched the numbers, just hours too late. It was a reminder that no algorithm, no simulation, and no computer can replace the sense of a driver who has lived the physics of speed for 2 decades. When the final fans had left Marina Bay and the circuit lights began to dim, Ferrari's garage stayed alive under harsh white glare. Hamilton's SF-25 sat in the middle of the floor, silent but accusing. The car that had symbolized progress now looked like evidence in an investigation. Mechanics worked quietly, removing scorched panels, cataloging damage. At the center of it all stood Fred Vasseur, hands folded, eyes fixed on the burnt front left brake. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. He knew this wasn't just a broken part. It was a broken process. The first detailed inspection revealed the truth that the data had missed. The brake caliper wasn't just overheated, it had been structurally compromised. Tiny fractures spidered across the composite surface, formed by repeated exposure to temperatures beyond the material's tolerance. The sensors inside the brake-by-wire system had melted into the housing, fusing with their connectors. There was no mechanical failure to blame, no single component that could be replaced. What Ferrari had built was a car that self-destructed under pressure. And that discovery changed everything. Hamilton was there when Vasseur received the report. He had asked to be present. For him, this wasn't about blame, it was about clarity. As the engineers explained the airflow imbalance and the thermal miscalculations, Hamilton remained silent, then finally said, "That's exactly what I felt." It was a simple statement, but it landed like a revelation. Every lap, every warning, every complaint over the radio had been right. For months, Ferrari systems had been telling them the car was fine. But the man driving it had been telling them it wasn't. Now the evidence proved him right. That moment became a line in the sand for Fred Vasseur. He looked around the room and saw what Ferrari had become, a team obsessed with data precision but blind to human instinct. He realized that the same culture that had made Ferrari an engineering powerhouse had also made it fragile. The pursuit of perfection had silenced intuition. And in Formula One, intuition is survival. When Vasseur finally spoke, his words were calm but sharp. "We have to start believing the driver again," he said. The room fell silent. For a man known for pragmatism, it was almost a confession. From that night forward, Ferrari's internal structure began to shift. Vasseur demanded a new approach, one that gave equal weight to the data and the driver's sensory feedback. He instructed his technical staff to begin recalibrating their simulation models around Hamilton's telemetry inputs rather than the other way around. It was more than a technical correction, it was a philosophical one. Ferrari would no longer build cars that looked perfect in numbers, but failed in human hands. The driver would no longer adapt to the machine. The machine would adapt to the driver.